Yeah, I got to throw on my headphones. It's all about the mic, man. It's all about the mic. Okay, cool. Are we ready to go?
We are ready to go.
All right. Yeah, so just like first off, this is going to be like more of an overview of what the actual strategy was, or what was in the document. The summary that Chris Hughes put out, he focused a lot more on like his thoughts and feelings and kind of like the implications of some of the things outlined in the strategy. So if you're at all interested in his take on like a little bit more about what the strategy means, I would definitely recommend like reading his little blog post. It's like, I don't know, like a 10 or 15-minute read. It's pretty quick. But this will be much more focused on just like what was in the strategy itself. So yeah, table of contents. There's at the very beginning, there's like the actual official memo saying like, this is what this strategy is doing. And like, I am hereby authorizing it. I called out like some keywords in this like opening paragraph. Securely and rapidly deliver resilient software and transforming delivery times from years to minutes. This is kind of like the broad strokes of like what this whole strategy is aiming to do, kind of like summed up in one paragraph. And we're going to kind of just get like progressively more in detail to like how the DoD is actually going to achieve this over the next couple of years as we go through this document and through this summary. So a little forward, they had a couple examples that were pretty interesting that they were using to illustrate how the transformation of software systems would be useful, or how they'd be applied in future situations. So like the today example, they used COVID, right? It's like National Guardsmen are deployed to respond. Right, the problems that they have right now are collaboration and communication. Like software cannot be seamlessly acquired and integrated to support like a DoD operation. So like the vision is today we should be able to do that. In 3 years, we're moving more into like, hey, the cyber warfare domain. They realize that cyber threats are they can escalate things and actually be the spark that escalates something into like a kinetic conflict. So what they want is, software factories can proactively develop and deploy things to some of these vulnerable or, like key systems to enable that, continuation of joint operations. And then 5 years in the future, this is kind of like the, hey, pie in the sky, this is where we want to be in 5 years. Say some sort of natural disaster crippled a partner nation's infrastructure, like cloud resources can be automatically committed. We can pull a bunch of stuff off the shelf, slam it together. Security and compliance and credentialing is all sort of baked in, and you have a collaboration environment like ready to go, within minutes. So that's like the vision. That's what they think like this software transformation strategy will be able to get us in the next couple of years. But there's a whole lot of stuff that has to happen before we get there. So we're going to talk about what the DoD thinks that we're going to have to do in order to get there as we go through. Right, now's the time to be bold. That was really interesting. Some like a line that I just wanted to take out and put in here. There's a lot of kind of like buzzwordiness at the beginning, but I think they actually do a pretty good job of backing up a lot of things that they're talking about here. So shifting left, but how do you do that? They talked about commercial partnerships to adopt cloud technology, and like a new commitment to department-wide approach for software factories. Like that was really interesting. How they, there is a lot of support for the software factory approach at really high levels, and kind of like renewing their commitment to these software factories. And then, so that's like one thing is the technology aspect, and we're going to kind of like hear this theme a couple of times throughout the document, is the tech enablement. But then alongside the tech enablement, you need like a process and people enablement to complement it, or really enable the tech transformation. So right, like current internal processes don't work well enough. So the DoD has to basically change everything, like the way that they collect and manage requirements, the way that budgets are drawn up and managed, and then the acquisition and security community, and couple this with a focus on people, right? Like there's going to be a whole thing about like talent, and talent management and recruiting and retaining talent. So yeah, here's the software modernization vision. This also seems somewhat familiar: deliver resilient software capability at the speed of relevance. So why is this important? U.S. adversaries can target, they target networks, critical infrastructure, and even individual citizens. Their target of choice is information and data, and the enabling means is software. So this, like the DoD, the US's fighting and winning will depend on their proficiency to deliver software capabilities. And so, to do that, you have to empower warfighters, cyber defenders. There's a couple of times like JADC2 and like zero trust architecture is mentioned, so they kind of pepper that in. And like all of this too, kind of like the data aggregation element is, arming leaders with decision advantage. And then they had like a little blurb about what resilience means and what delivering resilient software at the speed of relevance means. And so, right, to them, relevance implies the pace at which you deliver software in order to maintain a competitive advantage. And also, like another little interesting tidbit that I pulled out too, was unifying efforts across DoD and partners with industry-leading software institutions. There were a couple of things that like were really mentioned quite a few times throughout the strategy, was like partnering with industry, kind of like pulling out existing, best of breed software capabilities, and then partnering with industry-leading software institutions. Like it didn't feel like there was any like we need to build all of this ourselves. We need this like custom solutions that it's totally all in-house. It was very much like there are people who are better than us at building software. Let's partner with them. There are people who can just like give us a cloud environment, like, well, not give it to us, but they have it. We can pay for it. Let's use that. These tools are at our disposal, so like let's do the best that we can with the tools that are out there. So that was pretty interesting to hear. So the next section is unifying principles. This is really where it starts to get into the nuts and bolts of the strategy. So yeah, the first couple of sections was just kind of squishy, like this is what we want to do. So now as we get into the unifying principles and even the next section, it really dives into what do we need to do in order to achieve those outcomes. So, and I mentioned earlier too that there's kind of like these recurring themes, and the theme that I mentioned earlier was, having the tech transformation is sort of like one side of a coin, and the other side is process and people enablement. So actually breaking that down into these principles, the first one was a primacy of security, stability, and quality at speed. So it wasn't just like, we're going to sacrifice everything for the sake of speed. There are ways that we can deliver software, like high quality software at speed, and that software that is secure. And to do that, they want to aggressively adopt modern software development practices. So a lot of that is like DevSecOps, CI/CD, and that kind of plays into the strengths of the software factory as well. The next principle was cloud smart, data smart. That one was like kind of self-explanatory. It's just like, hey, cloud and data is important. Enterprise first, this one, maximizing value under constrained resources. There was a lot of discussion about achieving economies of scale. So kind of like having something available to the entire enterprise, and not necessarily having like tailor-made solutions for each department or even each like software factory. So having a focus on the enterprise to get the most out of what we have, in a sort of like a constrained resource environment. And then these last two are kind of like the accompanying principles, which is, people and processes. No one left behind. So development, training, and recruiting of the workforce are critical. So they're aware that it's very difficult for the DoD to recruit and retain people who are good at this. There were a couple of things that were thrown out. One was like, if we take airmen, guardians, soldiers, develop them internally to turn them, like give them the skill set that they need. That is one. And then also like a focus on recruiting some of those people. Like, right. Basically, they know that this is a tough nut to crack, and they're going to have to recruit and retrain talent if they want people internally to be able to do any of this stuff, like on the tech side. And then the last principle was more than code. So this is policies and practices. This is basically all of this sort of like connective tissue between the tech and the people. It needs to be able to really enable this whole thing. So that means changes to policies and practices and standards that empowers this change and doesn't get in the way, which we know that a lot of times it does currently. Okay, so the next section is the Software Modernization Framework. Yeah, wall of text, but let's talk about what the elements of the framework are. So there are 4 elements of the Software Modernization Framework: technical enablers, tech force multipliers, process transformation, and then outcomes for the warfighter. This one kind of took me a while to wrap my head around because I don't know, it just seems like that's a bunch of stuff. I don't know, it's like good stuff, but it doesn't necessarily go together for me anyway. So if this is just seems sort of like a bunch of words together, you're not the only one. This part was kind of hard to get through. So, but let's just sort of talk through it. That first element, the technical enablers, this is, right, like the technical things that are going to have to be put into place to enable this, right? It's a little bit self-explanatory. So the first one is a DoD enterprise cloud environment. So a structured approach to cloud adoption. And that is like, I think they even mentioned having like a portfolio of enterprise cloud providers. So it feels like this one is a bit of a response to like, okay, let's find something in between one cloud provider for all, or like having everybody have their own little unique platform. Like, sure, let's have a little, like a portfolio of cloud providers that kind of like has a lot of the environment, kind of like set up for you to obviously have like a secure environment, reduce that sort of onboarding time, as well as potentially realize a little bit more of those economies of scale where we don't have, hundreds of different cloud contracts. We have like 3 or 5. So that was interesting, DoD enterprise cloud environment, the cloud environment vendors at scale. The second one was design patterns. This one came up quite a few times. When I hear design patterns, I think of like UX or UI design. But what they're talking about here is kind of making elements of the software production process modular. So this could be something like access management or hardened containers, or kind of like any of those like little microservices should be like packaged up and sort of made available to people across the enterprise as a common design pattern. The third one, DevSecOps and tooling, enabling CI/CD. So like we've kind of talked about this one already, but having a focus on like the software factory as well as the DevSecOps process, as well, like you're starting to see how these things are, they're kind of like coming together, and there's like a vision for how software should be produced within the DoD. And then lastly, enterprise services. Let's see, providing ready-to-use composable functions. Yeah, I don't know. That one, I did this yesterday, so that one actually I can't really remember what that one was getting at, but it's kind of like it goes with the theme of like having this sort of ready-made environment, or like ready-made foundation for, that people can kind of just sort of like pick things up and use them at will. Okay, so the next element, tech force multipliers. This is much more of like the process and people side, actually more of the process side, continually reevaluating and adopting new software development concepts. So this was like a pretty short section, but I think what they were getting at was like, yeah, we know that there are better processes out there that the DoD doesn't really use on a wide scale. So right, we should start to move towards using some of these like better processes. However, we don't need to just use those. Like, we should be continuously reevaluating the processes that we use and the concepts that we use, the frameworks that we use, and adopt and implement them like when practical. So that's basically what that tech force multipliers element was. And then, so process transformation. This was cool. So they talked a lot about the economic incentives of process transformation, and as well as like starting small and allowing for incremental growth. So it didn't feel like it was just like a thou shalt do blank. It was more of like, we realized that there need to be kind of like these incentives to get people to do things a different way. They're leaving it up to this sort of like senior steering group to figure out what those incentives are, but they want those incentives to be placed across all of these different sort of like zones: business operations, acquisition, cyber survivability, testing, and the workforce. So yeah, those are all kind of self-explanatory. But then all of this, like they also want to measure outcomes for the warfighter. Like ultimately, all of this is supposed to deliver better capabilities into the hands of the warfighter faster. So even if we did all of this stuff, like totally modernized the way that software was developed, and we got high quality, secure software out the door really quickly, it wouldn't matter if it didn't deliver better capabilities to the warfighter. So that was actually another thing that was really interesting to see about keeping warfighter outcomes in mind. So let's go to goals and objectives. There are 3 goals. I think I tricked you guys. There's only like 6 bullets on the intro slide, but there's so many sub-objectives. But I promise, I think we're getting close to the end. So accelerate the DoD enterprise cloud environment. We've already sort of talked about this, like the structure of the strategy, like it just starts really general and just like gets continually more and more in depth. So we've already talked about like an enterprise cloud environment, like what they want to do with vendors and having things kind of be like cloud centric. Then even within this, there are a couple like sub-objectives. So innovative portfolio of cloud contracts. Yeah, we've already sort of talked about that. Securing data in the cloud, accelerating cloud adoption through, this automated design patterns. Again, we've talked about those design patterns, infrastructure as code, compliance as code, container hardening, etc. But then the one thing that we haven't talked about is preparing OCONUS for cloud. They talk about this at the very beginning, at that like 5-year outlook, is, like say there's something that happens at OCONUS and we want to spin something up, and we need partner nations to be prepared. And be able to like access these new capabilities that we're trying to deploy rapidly. So part of that is like preparing OCONUS for cloud infrastructure. So that's goal 1. Goal 2, establish department-wide software factory ecosystem. I mean, this is super interesting too. They call out some of the already existing software factories across the DoD. So the objectives here: advancing DevSecOps through enterprise providers. Right. This is, just again, like we've already sort of talked about this, but like within the context of the software factory, there's a lot of discussion about like leveraging enterprise providers, right, to efficiently scale and do that unnecessary, minimize unnecessary duplication. So the way that it seems like they're kind of like proponing is, potentially having like maybe common platforms or just like common tools that software factories can just sort of like use at their disposal, so that they are realizing some of those economies of scale. And since they're like these, kind of like best of breed enterprise tools, it makes it easier for software factories to scale. Second objective: accelerating software development with continuous authorization. Yeah, I know this is another like massive can of worms. Right now, it's sort of like a check the box or a snapshot in time for your compliance. So they didn't really offer a solution here, but it was just like, we need continuous authorization. It needs to go from snapshot in time to real time with continuous evidence tracking. Next one, driving reciprocity of tools with enterprise repository. Yes, we've already talked about this one too. And then let's see, streamlining control points. Oh yeah, this one was really interesting. I think this kind of like goes hand in hand with the continuous authorization, or just like initial authorization. So control points and decision approvals. So like at organization and network boundaries, right? That's like a huge, those are huge hurdles for people to get through when you're talking about, building something that spans, I guess, potentially multiple organizations or multiple networks, and it slows things way down. So streamlining that stuff would go a long ways to building software that is a little bit further reaching than just like the organization that software is being built for. And then, yeah, speeding innovation into the hands of the warfighter. So, using industry, academia, and the scientific communities to evolve and innovate smartly. There's a little bit of discussion about, not just relying on the innovation that is within the DoD, but also like looking out to these other industries or these other communities to look for sources of innovation. All right, last goal: transform process to enable resilience and speed. So the objectives here: evolve policy, regulations, and standards, pretty self-explanatory. Make acquisition more agile, pretty self-explanatory. Treat software as data. That was interesting. I don't really know what else I can say about that one, but I think they were kind of like towing the line around, there's this thing: DoD must ensure appropriate data rights to develop, maintain, and protect software. I think there was like, they wanted a little bit more ownership of the software that the DoD uses. All right, advancing technical competencies. This goes back to like the people management thing. So as the DoD grows more reliant on software, they also need to build out internal training programs to get people up to speed on like how to actually use or build or manage any of this software. And then part of that too is empowering the broader workforce as contributors to technology. So saying like, okay, it's not only devs are the ones that can affect, software. Having a tech literate workforce can also streamline the technology kind of like modernization and upgrading process. Yeah, manage COTS software for efficiencies and effectiveness. Like, yeah, use COTS when possible, and then incentivize the use of enterprise services. We've talked about this a few times now too. So they also realize that the enterprise service must deliver at or above the level required by the end user. Otherwise, the end user is going to go drum up their own solution. I think something that I didn't mention too, maybe I just glossed over it, was talking about leadership as part of the people management thing. Taking people who are tech literate and putting them in positions of authority or leadership positions within like these software factories, or just like within this sort of like newly emerging software kind of like environment within the DoD. I thought that was really interesting. I know we've probably a lot of us have experienced some of the friction around that, or just maybe some of the shortcomings. So that was really interesting to see called out in this strategy as well. So unified implementation, this is like everybody's got to do it. They also called out saying like these are the people that are responsible for it. These are the people that are gonna create some senior steering working group. I think they said within 180 days they had to have a plan like reported back up to the DoD CIO. And what they're also going to try to do is not only figure out how they're going to do this whole software modernization thing, but figure out how they're going to support other initiatives like JADC2, zero trust architecture, and the like EM spectrum superiority effort. So yeah, there's a lot going on there. And I know I just talked for like 25 minutes. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And if anybody has any questions, I might be able to answer them.
Dude, I got one first. Thanks. That was like a super well done deep dive into the modernization strategy. So I kind of got like the impression that they have this very enterprise focused approach to their modernization approach. Did you get that same impression when you read it word for word, or are they still allowing optionality and not pushing like mandates of like platform one or anything like that?
Yeah, it felt like they wanted to have more tools and resources available at the enterprise level, but that would be like a selection of tools, so that the enterprise could realize some economies of scale, but also leave enough room for like a tailorable solution to like whatever that that organization or software factory needed.
Cool. Thanks. All right. Not hearing any other questions. Clark, you the man. Thank you so much. It was a good brief. I'll post this in the general channel so everybody can take a listen for those who missed it. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to do it.
All right. Take care, everybody.